All right. Thanks everyone for joining this session. Snake Early Game Strategies and Tactics with Aurora Walker. My name is Matthias, and I'll be the moderator of this session. If you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to add them to the chat. Aurora will take a look. We'll be keeping an eye on it, and we'll answer them as the presentation progresses, or at the end, we can also answer all the questions. We would like to thank our sponsor for this session, which is Lighthouse Labs. A huge thank you for them for supporting Startup Slam. And you can connect to them and learn more about what they do at their virtual booth at any time at 1 p.m. today, until 1 p.m. today, sorry. So Aurora Walker is a software development manager at Bambora, a chapter lead for Canada Learning Code Victoria, and most importantly, a friend of Battlesnake. Aurora is an experienced Python developer and lifelong Victoria, BC resident.
Cool. Thank you, Matthias. And as was said, please ask questions all throughout. I am happy to be interrupted as we go through this. But I would like to welcome you all to my talk on early game strategies and tactics for Battlesnake. Very good. So for those of you who may be new, and please type in the chat, type if you have ever done a Battlesnake yourself, if you've ever seen, you know what Battlesnake is, or if you're just like, what is Battlesnake? I'll check out this session and find out. So please write in the chat and tell me your experience. But for any of you who may be new, welcome. Battlesnake is an amazing programming online now competition where you write a snake, you write code to control a snake going through the standard snake game on your phone. So what you see here in this, animated GIF is exactly what happens. Is these snakes go left, right when they eat food, which are the red dots, they grow. And if you collide with yourself or collide with an opponent snake, you will perish. And there are also some extra rules, like with head-on-head collisions, whichever snake is longer is going to be the victor. And if you're the same size, you both terminate. So please check it out. Battlesnake has gone online this year. So definitely see twitch.tv Battlesnake Official. We've been running online competitions throughout the summer, and the Twitch streams and the sessions are fantastic. There's an event called Snake Pit Live. So if you saw the opening welcome statement this morning, Aileen was one of the presenters. Aileen is also a caster for Battlesnake. So you will see her friendly face there, along with some other favorites. We've got Chris and Curtis as our other casters. So check it out. There's video tutorials. There's a video of me doing an earlier version of this talk. Definitely see the Battlesnakes. It's a lot of fun. So the plan, this sounds good. You see this, you maybe, you're familiar with coding and you're like, I would like to write a snake. I would like to write a snake that competes. But something that I've spoken a lot about with the Battlesnake crew is there's this concept of the first 4 commits every snake should have. And this is why I love Battlesnake. I'm involved in Canada Learning Code, which is very much an organization for learning how to program for that beginner level. And Battlesnake for me is the next step after. It's this chance for you to really practice your skills and be like, okay, how do I write code? How do I iteratively develop? And how do I make changes and test and experiment? So to me, Battlesnake is a great learning and growth opportunity for a lot of developers early in their experience. But it's also incredibly fun if you are an experienced developer. Battlesnake is a really good German board game, where it's really easy to learn, but a lifetime to master. So that's what I love. So I have built the Python standard starter snake that is supplied by Battlesnake, and I've deployed it using Repl.it, which is an interesting tool. It's also a code editor embedded as well. But I can deploy a service and run my snake through Repl.it and then run games on the Battlesnake website. So even though everything I'm going to show you today is in Python, I really want to talk more about the high-level concepts that will apply no matter what programming language you choose to write your snake in. And nothing is hidden here. So if you want to see every little mistake, every little commit message that I wrote when building this snake, you can see it on my GitHub account. It's public. Please take a poke about. So when we're building snakes, there's kind of like a standard formula. These are the first problems you want to solve. And the very first thing you want to do is don't run into walls. Then you don't want to run into yourself. Then you don't want to run into other snakes on the board. And then the final problem you want to solve is to not starve. So let's dive into each of these one at a time. Oh, and I'm seeing here a link to the slides. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to pop that in a little later, but let me just loop that in there right now. You guys get to just see me do this. This is fine. It's cool. Cool. Copy link. Yeah, I have no problem with you folks checking these slides later. This is a public copy I've made, so I'm not going to modify it. So you're in good shape here. You can definitely reference this. All right. Pop that out of the way. Awesome. So yeah, follow along. And I do invite you, if you have come to this workshop prepared with a snake ready and you're like looking for tips to tweak it, you can code along. You can also take a step back and just watch and listen and absorb and reference my GitHub repo and this talk after if you prefer. Please take whatever learning strategy is most comfortable for you. Definitely as a programmer, one of the most intense languages or intense lessons I had to learn was that the most important skill is actually reading code, not writing code. Because when you're coding, if you really look at yourself, you're like, And then like maybe 10% of the time you're typing. So definitely take some time to think and absorb and read. It's a good skill to always practice. All right, so let's take a look at the commits every snake should have. But before that, heavy advice, RTFM, read the freaking manual. This is so key and this is so important no matter what programming project you're taking. I know folks like to joke like, hi, I worked on this problem for 10 hours and finally solved it and avoided having to spend 10 minutes looking at the docs. So I would like to encourage you to really read the manual because there's sometimes some gotchas. There's a lot of information that might not be obvious or you might not discover. So the first one is the coordinate system on the grid. And I just want to highlight, so Battlesnake recently had an API version release. And the origin actually used to be in the top left-hand corner, which really caught people off guard because that was certainly not my intuition. But it's important to know these details and you won't know unless you take a look. So if you're using the previous Battlesnake API version, the origin is in the top left-hand corner. But right now with the new version, API 1, it is in the bottom left-hand corner. So this is a fine example of one of the many facts you need. Taking a look at the documentation as well, the other thing you really need to know is what kind of data am I getting back? So the way the Battlesnake system works is you are running a server and it's going to take API web requests back and forth and it's going to hear from the Battlesnake servers, like what's the state of the board? And you're going to return information about what your snake is going to do. So there's these two web servers bouncing back and forth. And in order to succeed at that communication, you really need to know what's the expected data? What do I have to send? What am I getting back? So do take a look at this and do pop it open. If I just crack open the API reference docs here as an example, you're going to get a lot of information like how long before I have a timeout. So that's pretty critical. You need to know that the Battlesnake system, if your response takes more than 500 milliseconds, it's not taking it. It's not waiting for you. So you need to know all the boundaries and all of the different API calls and the data types they take. And for me, the real money is right at the bottom here. This gives me a full sample of like what all the game data is. The boards, the height and width of the board, which is important to know, your snake locations, and seeing, it takes an XY coordinate system. So take some time, like study this, look at this, try and understand what it means so that you're prepared when you're building your snake. Fantastic. All right. So with that preamble, let's take a look at some code. The very first option is to not run into a wall. And you might notice here that all of my 4 commits here start with like a negative, a don't statement. And that really articulates how I decided to organize my code. So I started development by sort of picking a random move and then avoiding disaster. That's kind of the theme of my snake. So I'm going to pop open my code here. So I'm just using PyCharm as my coding editor. It's an IntelliJ development tool. I've been using it for a long time. It's certainly the one I'm most comfortable in. So I just have my code here at a snake. So this is not too different from your basic starter snake. So there's a couple of things here to note. First is here's the Battlesnake class, and here's the index. This is probably the most important function in the entire program because it's where you choose your color and the head and tail design of your snake. So another good reason to pop into the docs is you can see preview images of all the possible head and tails. There are a lot of combos. There are a lot of specialty heads. Every time Battlesnake runs a new event, there seems to be new heads being released. So play with that. There's also kind of a hot tip. I've heard a lot of Battlesnake developers like to change the head and tail to prove to themselves that the snake that's running in the servers is their most updated version, especially if they're playing with Repl.it or like Heroku or something and aren't 100% confident that their new snake is deployed. So that can be like a hot debugging tip. But yeah, check out the docs and see your different color and head design. So I've gone with Classic Pixel. Whenever a Battlesnake game starts, this is pretty simple. I've only made a small increase here to the code. So basically you get, your server will receive a start command and it just has to return okay. But this is a really good time to maybe set some information that you want to hang on to. And the piece of information I definitely want to know is how big is the board? You can start games with different sized boards. So this is an important thing to stash away. And I've just decided to create some global variables. So I have a file down here where I've started to stash some global variables. So I know what the minimum and the maximum of the board is. And I just default to them to 0. And then every time a game starts, I set them. You may be thinking, you know, like, hey, Aurora, aren't global variables bad? Truthfully, context matters. So in the context of a Battlesnake game, in the context of just starting my first commit and just trying to like play with some ideas and see how I want to do things, this is a really quick way to get myself going, and I can kind of modify and grow and maybe change into something more complicated later. But let's start simple. That's a really key thought here. To protect myself, because I know the problems you can get into with global variables are like accidentally overwriting them or changing them when you don't need to. So what I like to do is I just like to have like a little file that separates them out. And I promise myself that I will limit how often I update them so I don't confuse myself. So I just do this in the start. I set the board max and minimum and return. So here's the real meat of it. This is where a lot of the action is going to come, and that's in your move function. So once again, I have a small change to the base. This is what you're going to get in a default starter snake. So if you check out the starter snake that Battlesnake provides, it's going to give you a random snake. So there's 4 possible moves that your snake can move in: up, down, left, right. And then it's just going to randomly pick one, which is okay. It'll get your snake moving, but not a lot of control. So this is going to be my move strategy. I'm not going to change this too much for starting and for experimenting because this is good enough. Instead, what I'm going to focus on is my avoidance. So my logic here is that I'm going to let this randomizer pick a move. And then down here, I am going to examine that move and decide whether or not it's safe. So my first check is going to be, is it a wall? So I have this while loop. So while the possible move choice, if it does not avoid a wall, so I'm going to pop this into my function, and we'll look into this avoid walls code I wrote in just a second, then it'll keep picking randomly until it gets a random move that avoids a wall. And that's all that this is going to do for me. And then as per the Battlesnake API, I have to return what move I want to do, whether it's left, right, up, or down. And this shout functionality in this game mode isn't really helpful, but it can be fun. So I've just got like a little war cry in there. So this is your starter snake, and this is my meat here. This is my strategy, is avoid walls. So I've also separated out my code into 2 files. I just want to have the basic server stuff on the left here, and on the right, I'm going to start playing with strategies and writing code. So I've created this function avoid walls, and it's going to take 2 pieces of information. So from the data, so this cherrypie.request.json. So cherrypie is the web framework here that's helping us run our web server. And this request.json is just taking out that JSON structure, so that big, dictionary curly braces looking thing, And if I go into that, I can take a look, and I apologize, this is the old API version, so I had to go to my self, body, and zero, but in the new API version, there's a shortcut to get the head, which is just head, but that's okay. And this is a good spot to pause and take a look here. If you are very new to programming, and just to pop back into the API reference here, and you're looking at this, so this is the JSON data structure that the server gives us, is you might have to pause even here and go, well, hang on. Am I working in a programming language I'm not familiar with? Do I know how to interact and take information out of a JSON object like this? What are the rules in the programming language I'm working in? And if you're not familiar with that, that's a time to pop out and take a look at the documentation for your programming language and find out how this works. So I'm a Python developer. I've been working in Python for over a decade, building web services. I'm very familiar with interacting with JSON objects and dictionaries in Python. Dictionary is my favorite data structure. Fun Aurora fact, just hands down my favorite. So I'm quite comfortable with that and this notation. So data, u, body, zero, that's how I go into the dictionary. So I grab me, I grab my body, and I grab zero or head. So if I crack open, if I look at this data structure, where is u here? So here we go. At a top level key is u, here's body, and this is a list of coordinates, and the first one is the head. So this was the way I had to do it in the previous API version, or there's also a shortcut here. So this will get me the coordinates for my head as well. So just knowing how to navigate that is like really your first battle. And it's okay. It's okay if you're new to programming and you're still navigating those waters. That's totally cool. Cool. Awesome. So with that sort of started, seeing how to pull data out of the JSON object that the server gives us, we have all of the state board information. We know where our snake is located on the game board. And now we've randomly picked a move using our randomizer code here. And then I'm going to check to see whether or not up, down, left, or right is going to run me into a wall. That's my first step. I just want to know that. So let's take a look at my avoid walls function right here. Cool. So I've taken a simple function. I'm just going to get it to take the two pieces of information. So what is the XY coordinate of my head? And what is the move that my randomizer picked for me? And I'm going to take those two pieces of information and figure out if it's safe. And I'm just going to return true if it is or false if it is not. So the first thing I did, and I couldn't help myself, was figure out what the XY coordinates of my next move is. Because I want to compare, like, if my head is at like 0, 4, but my next move is right, that's hard to compare. So I wrote a little helper function called predict future position, which will take the left, right, up, and down and convert it to an XY coordinate. So that is up here. It's pretty lightweight. Maybe it's a bit verbose. But I'm just taking this information and producing a dictionary in Python. So it's going to return something like this, right? Let's turn something like, I don't know, x1, y4. So if it takes left, it'll convert it to an XY coordinate system. And that's a little easier for me to compare my head location to whatever the new square is. So that's what this function is going to give me. And once I have that, I'm going to pop this, make sure I've got all integers that I'm working with here, and I'm just going to check. So if the x coordinate of the next move is less than 0 or less than 0 on either the x or the y axis, I know that there's no negative locations on the board, so that's a wall. That's going to return false. And same thing if the x or y value is larger than the board size. If it's either of those, then I'm also going to run into a wall. So I'm just going to return false in any of these conditions. And if you are sharp-eyed, you might have noticed by now that I've got a little bug in my code. But if not, it's okay. Well, I'll fix it later. It's cool. It's cool. I've got this. Sweet. So these are the functions that I've created. I've got a little avoid walls. That's really as far as I'm going. And even though this seems very modest, like you kind of want to like go further, stop here and run your snake. So let's see what that looks like. So I have set this up using Repl.it. There are instructions in the README of the GitHub repo on how to do this. And Repl.it is quite cool. It allows you actually to modify your files and use this as a text editor as well. So you'll see this is the same code. I am new to Repl.it, so I'm sticking to my comfort zone of PyCharm, but you can work in here. But what's cool is once you're running your snake, you've got your output on the right here, and I can actually run games with this. So it's running. I can see the information about my snake, so which API version I am, my color, and my head and tail. So I know it's running successfully, so I should be able to create a game. So I've already gone and registered my snake, and to create a game, just to like test and practice, you can just create a game on your own. So here's basic strats, my snake, which I registered on the Battlesnake website earlier. And let's do a small board. So it'll be a 7x7. And I'm just going to start the game and we'll see what happens. So first, okay, that's cool. It goes fast, but you can kind of go backwards in our moves here. So this is interesting. I can see that the first move my snake wanted to make was to go left. So that's cool. It goes up. It turned right. So that's nice. This is like, oh, it's avoiding a wall, isn't it? Yeah, that makes me feel good. And then it turned back on itself, which it has no way to prevent. That's not a move I'm avoiding. So this is a success. To me, this is great. And you might want to run your snake over and over again. Just really focus on the avoiding walls component for now. But that makes me feel quite good to see it successfully avoid that wall. And I can pop back into Repl.it as well. And I have some print statements in here telling me about what data is in the move and whether or not it decides to make a certain move. So future head is on the left. Will the future head not result in a wall collision? True. So that tells me how my snake decided where it wanted to go. So use print statements liberally to help you figure out what you want to do, what you don't want to do, and debug your snake, just sort of going through this development cycle. Fantastic. All right, so that's don't run into walls. So let's talk about don't run into yourself. So here is a good example. Like once I've really got the wall thing nailed down, and I was running on a really big board, I found that typically what happened is my snake would just like get longer and longer and longer. And then it would eventually get itself into a situation like this, where it doesn't really have a choice. It's going to either run into a wall or run into itself. So this was like a really great achievement to see my snake consistently terminate this way. And that's okay. So how did I get there? Let's go back to the code. Cool. So this took a couple of steps for me. I'm going to show you kind of an interim step first, which is, whoops. Okay, I accidentally made some edits here. Cool. You avoid self 1. There we go. My terminal's so tiny I can barely see what's going on. There we go. So let's take a look at what I did after this. After I'd been running my snake a whole bunch, I have new versions of my code. So just taking a look at this, very little has changed here. I still have my snake definitions. I still have my boards size described, and I'm moderately confident this works, at least in the tests I've been doing. And I've made one big change here. So I've modified a little bit what information I'm pulling out of the JSON data structure. At first I was only pulling the head, but now I need more information. I need my whole body to make sure I don't run into myself. I'm still doing a random choice move, so that's unchanged. And I've made a slight modification here. I like this little while loop, but I've created a new helper function called validate move. And I'm going to pass to validate move all of my body information and the move I'm going to try for. So if I pop over to strategy here, validate move is a nice little code abstraction. So this is, as soon as I started writing a second rule, so you can see here, here's avoid walls, and avoid walls is the same. I haven't changed it. It's a nice little isolated function. And then I created a new function called stop hitting yourself because, I don't know, I was feeling clever in the moment. And now these are two strategies that I'm using. So I've combined them in one function called validate move. I could have called two inside of here. I could have done, avoid walls and stop hitting yourself. But that's just going to get long. And then I know that's just going to get huge and really unwieldy the more and more I code. So I really advocate and recommend a strategy like this, because then I can more easily swap strategies if I'm trying different things. And helps me just keep my code a little tight and organized. I've definitely seen some snakes in my time where it's just like a wall of text. And then when you have a bug, it is a nightmare to try and debug. So this is a lot easier for your debugging and code reading and comprehension. So here's validate move. So avoid walls is the same. I still have to pull out the head information. And here's stop hitting yourself, which is, let's take a look in here. So very similar format. It is going to take the information it needs. So where's your snake body? And it will also take what the next move is. And I reused my predict future position code here. So the same sort of thing, to switch the word left, right, up, down to an XY coordinate that's better to compare. And this is very terse in Python. But I basically just asked if my future head, so if where the next move would take me is inside of my body, then return false. I would be colliding with myself. So just to sort of expand that, because Python makes this very simple, it's kind of like saying, let's say my head is at, I don't know, X1, Y2. So if this is in, and my body is a list of coordinates, so it would look something like, let's say I'm of length 3. So the first one would be my head, my torso, and my little tail. And I don't know, let's say this is all. Actually, let's change this. So if this is like 1, 2, or 1, 1, 1, 2, and 1, 3. So this is a good example of if my next move is in my body. So we can see that it is. So this would be a good example of preventing the head from turning back in on itself. I'm not going to do there. So it'll skip that move now, or any other move if your body is longer. So that's kind of expanding out that logic. But I love how tiny Python makes this for me. So this will just check, and it will return false. So down in my validate move, I'm taking those two strategies. My first rule, avoid wall, that's going to be either true or false. And then stop hitting yourself is going to be either true or false. And then I'll check, are they both true? Are they both false? Just use a kind of Boolean check here. And as long as both of them are safe from running into a wall and safe from running into your body, I will return that true, it is safe. And if either of them are false, it is not a safe move. Cool. So this was my interim version. And when I was running this, and I'm not going to demo it because I found Repl.it hasn't been stoked about me switching between branches. It kind of chokes a little bit there on me and needs a lot to start up. But take my word for it that when I ran this, it just started behaving in a really chaotic, terrible, awful way. And I was struggling to figure it out. So I'm just going to push us forward to the future to my next iteration on this, because my snake was not working. It was running into walls. It was running into itself. It was like doing everything bad. So I have a new branch, and avoid self 2 and avoid wall. These kind of states are branches that you can see in my GitHub repo. I'll just pop over there, show you what I mean. So if you're in my GitHub repo and you look at the 4 branches, these states that I'm switching back and forth, you can just see them exactly as they are. So feel free to take a closer look. But once I was working on this, I realized I had some problems. So the first, let's see here. So here it is. So the first was that I was actually, I was realizing I had an off by 1 error, and it took me a little while to figure it out. I ended up doing a lot of refactoring in my journey to try and solve this problem. So you can see here, I was like, well, is there something wrong with my predict future position function? So I ended up refactoring this and commenting it really thoroughly. I like commenting as a technique for sanity checking or writing notes to myself to just verify that this works correctly. At this point, I renamed my function to be more consistent, avoid self, because that's a common bug that can pop up as well, right? creating clever names and then they're hard to remember. And as a programmer professionally at work, I really, really, really value consistency. So I moved to that zone of more consistent comments and consistent naming conventions. So the first bug I noticed was that I was predicting the future position twice. So I was doing it in my avoid wall function, and I was doing it in my avoid self function. And that was producing something weird, something awkward. So I pulled that out. I realized, wait a second, I only have to predict the next move once. I only have to translate the word left, right, up, or down to an XY coordinate system once. So I pulled that out into my validate move function. And that helped a little bit, but it didn't completely solve my problem. So I'm going to blast forward again into the future to avoid self final, where I finally fixed all my bugs. And let's take a nice calm look at what I had here. So first off, I had all the way back at the beginning when I was building my avoid wall code is I had an off by 1 error. So you can see here in my global variables, if the board width is 15, that means the locations 0 to 14 are valid. And it only happened on 2 of the borders of my wall. So if we take a look at a snake grid here, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the size is 7. So if I was on the left or bottom wall, I correctly turned. It looked like it was working, but it would always think it had one more space on the top and right. So that was a bit of a problem there. So that was my first bug. My second bug, so I was playing with this. You'll see that I was adding so many debug comments. I actually even did something a little gross here, if I'm being honest, but I got myself, it was getting stuck in these infinite loops. So I actually just hacked together, like, just do it 10 times because my server was getting stuck. And at the time I was doing this in Heroku, and I was like, oh, I guess now I have to learn how to force stop a Heroku server because I got it stuck in an infinite loop. So I added all this like weird logic to try and debug it. And then what I realized finally, so here's my validate now, this is looking the same. Here's my avoid self, it's looking the same. Here's my avoid wall. I finally realized, and this goes to show that it doesn't matter how many years experience you have, the same mistakes can crop up, especially if it's been a while since you've coded, which is something that my manager position does, is this is how this looked before. So when I was predicting my future position, I would take my current head and copy it, and then I would modify it to either increase or decrease the X or Y coordinate for left, right, or up and down. And in Python, when you take a dictionary object and you do this, it's like a pointer. It's actually pointing at the same data location in memory. So I was actually modifying the location that my program thought my head was currently at, which is how I got into a weird loop, and then it would get into the negatives or something, and I'd get stuck. So when you're doing a copy of a dictionary in Python, this is a very Python-specific gotcha, but a good reason why you want to be familiar with their language, is I actually had to copy it so that when I was down here increasing the X or Y coordinate, I was modifying a copy, not my original head. So that eluded me for quite some time, let me tell you. But in that bug fixing, I did a lot of cleanup, and I'm a lot happier with the state of my code at this point. So this is a lot more concise. I've made some improvements there. I also put this all in one line. I mentioned earlier that Battlesnake has a 500 millisecond timeout. So you really do want those little efficiencies, especially as your logic gets more complicated. So a common efficiency in most programming languages is as soon as, if you have an if statement like this, bound together with ors and ands, as soon as the first condition is false, it'll exit and it won't even bother to evaluate the rest of the conditions. So that's just a slight improvement boost to just sort of make sure that it's not, doing if, else, 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 and like going through all of them. Just allows that to tighten that up a little bit. So I felt good about that. I added some comments too. So I was thinking about my avoid self function, and I was like, well, what if I eat food and get longer on the next move? I could get into a situation where my tail accidentally gets like longer as I'm trying to move into the space. So I wanted to keep this simple, but I put a to-do in here to remind myself, because that was a complication and a problem I didn't want to solve until after I fixed my bugs. So just some tips and thoughts on how to modify your print statements, get your ideas in your comments for future you to work on, and also just nailing down all those bugs. So by the time I had this, I was pretty happy. I had a snake that would run through my board and avoid the walls and avoid running into itself until it literally had no choice, until it was stuck in a position very much like this, right? Where it had gone all through the board, and then this is the only way the snake would terminate. Cool. All right. So we've talked about not running into walls, going slow, watching your board, not running into yourself, you know, a little bit of growth there, taking it slowly. But with the types of bugs you can find, and especially the type of bugs I was getting in my code, this going really, really smooth, slowly and keeping my ambitions small and just going through this list really slowly helped. So by the time I had my next goal of don't run into other snakes, it was really easy to do this because I'd done myself so many favors in the way I had laid out my code. Cool. So let's take a look at what that looks like here. Oops. Oh, so I've done a lot here, but what I want to zoom in on here, oops. Oh, so many comments, Aurora. Avoid snake. Here we go. So I realized that I already had code written for avoiding one snake. It wasn't that much of a stretch to expand that to avoid every snake. So going back over here, my server code essentially hasn't really changed. I still have a bit of a loop. I did a couple of modifications and tweaks, but I'm still validating my move. And when I call validate move, I still avoid wall. And I just changed this from avoid self to avoid snakes. And I made a slight modification where I still need to know, like, what's the next move? What's my future head? But now instead of just taking my own body, I take all of the snake bodies. And something that was really convenient when I was looking at the Battlesnake docs was that if we take a look in here, there is a list of the snakes. But what I didn't realize at first that I did learn later was that the list of all snakes is every snake on the board, including yourself. So I didn't have to do anything awkward. I mean, you down here is helpful. You is really great for just getting information about you. But I was able to take the complete list of snakes, including myself, and then I just had to iterate over them, which was really handy. So taking a look at my taking a look at my avoid snakes. So this is how it looked before, actually, a future head in, and I just had body. And all I had to do in order to look at every snake body was to add a for loop around this. So for every snake in snake bodies. And at this point, I found it most helpful to get a bit of a comment here to remind me of the data structure that the server is sending me. So what I have is inside the snake bodies, I have a list of the dictionary of snake bodies. So they all have an ID and a name. You can see what health any specific snake is, which is maybe information you want later. And then the body is just the XY coordinates that we were looking at before. So this code is just going to look at the first one and check to see if your future head is going to be inside that snake's body. Take a look at the second one, see if your future head is going to be in this snake's body, and then the last one. And you know that one of these is yours, so you don't have to do a special check to look for your own body versus any other snake on the board. So once I got this going, it worked pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. And I'm going to see, let's just pop over to Repl.it for a second. I'm going to try to switch it to the most recent version of my snake and see if it'll... Okay, I know Repl.it has not been super stoked with me. There's something special with this poetry lock file. Cool, overwrite and continue. So apologies for this little quick hack here as it chugs along. And we'll see. I'm just going to make sure the poetry file is the same one I was using before. Awesome. And I'm on my main line. Perfect. So let's just see if I can get that started again. Cool. So we'll let that do that in the background. So I was feeling pretty good at this point. Like I was not running into walls. I was not running into myself. I was not running into other snakes. And it was time to sort of start looking at the next problem, which is don't starve yourself, because there's food on the board. And I have literally written zero code to accommodate food. Oh yeah, this is what I should do, sorry. I should definitely run a game here with more than one snake on the board, assuming Repl.it is started. And you can do that as well. And I was just running it with myself and seeing this happen, them running and seeing these kind of loss conditions as well, where they would maybe head-to-head collision, or they would run into each other's bodies when they had no other choice. So this made me feel pretty confident running test games with my snakes, having them not like collide. So let's see, is this running? Oh, it is. So let's give that a go. Let's try that here. So I'll create a new game. Let's create a medium-sized board, and you can just add your own snake multiple times. So let's put 4 in there. See what happens. Oh yeah, okay. Woo, look at them go. Look at them not run into walls. Oh yeah, oh yeah. This is very satisfying. And if I go backward in the moves, so this is, I mean, this is a head-on-head collision. So I haven't checked for that. I haven't written any code to prevent that. So it's really delightful to see the termination conditions. Same thing here. We go forward. There we go. Ran into basic strats body, yeah. So this is good, and this is how you can continue to test and iterate with your snake on different size boards or smaller boards. So I was feeling really good at this point. And in fact, I was feeling so good at the time when I originally wrote this snake, the Battlesnake Summer of Code was running, and I entered it into the veteran division, which for something that can only avoid itself, avoid walls, is pretty crazy. And I was actually not last. Like, I just want to emphasize how really nailing down these basic strategies, these like first, few commits, put you on the board in the veteran league, which has some very impressive snakes in it that are much, much smarter than mine. So do it. It's worth it to put the time into the foundations, even if it seems a little slow or awkward at first. So with don't starve yourself, now we're going to move a little bit into sort of like a philosophical discussion, because not starving is an interesting milestone that really starts to touch on like the greater strategy. Because when do you want to eat food? So if you're at this point, your next step should be to start writing some helper functions like, where's the nearest food? That might be a good thing to know. Maybe you're not moving towards it, but maybe you need a helper function that looks at the board data and gives you the coordinates of the food that is nearest to you. Because depending on what your larger Battlesnake strategy is, you might only want to eat food at 0 health, and you can't actually live for 1 turn at 0 health. So you might want to keep it low or check below 20 health. Do you want to keep your snake small? Or do you want to go for every piece of food? Do you want to get really, really big? Is there such a thing as too big? And I've observed in my testing that usually, even where I am right now with my code, is I usually eat enough food by accident that I might not need to focus on this too much, this eating food component, until I think about what strategy I want to implement. So there's a new thing on the Battlesnake website. If you haven't played Battlesnake in a while, there's a thing called challenges. And challenges are a really, really great way to kind of hone your code and explore some different common scenarios. So with my snake as is, I've already gotten some bronze awards for like a solo survival challenge and solo length. So these are like testing strategies and testing awards that can get you to try different strategies and force your snakes into different scenarios and kind of prove to yourself that things are working. So this can be a great way to explore what are the different types of things I see in a Battlesnake situation. Does it always work? Does it get into awkward corner cases? And there are quite a few new challenges coming out, and it's something that's being actively worked on. So challenges are new. They're very fun. You can add your snake to a challenge. But as you do this, you're going to start to see some kind of common strategies, and I want to tell you why you should try them. So the first is random move, or the default starter snake. It's actually what we have right now. And what I like about this is it is chaos based. It is just random. And there's something to be said for, there's that like story of like a master fencer or a master chess player can sometimes lose to a complete beginner because the beginner acts erratically. The beginner doesn't know like what are the proper rules. So chaos can be really cool, especially against an advanced machine learning snake that assumes that your behavior has some sort of predictability. But what if you don't? What if you're just chaotic? So I like random move chaos snakes. I think it's a great strategy. There's also a type of snake called chicken snake. So if you've ever been to a Battlesnake event before, you may have seen chicken snake. It's a defensive strategy, and I'll show you what that looks like. But you might also want to go for an attack snake that is like deliberately trying to get big and then like head-on-head collision ram a snake that's smaller than it. That is like an approach you could take as well. So whether you want to be defensive, attackish, or chaotic. So I mean, random move chaos, this is what we have. And there's some improvements. Like if you take a look at my existing code for my snake, there's a couple of things that are kind of awkward about it that could be improved. So the first is that my code will re-randomly consider moves it's already considered and rejected. So there's an optimization I could do there where if you've looked at left and you've determined left is a wall, remove left from the options. Like don't check left again. And that's actually where I had my awkward loop where I was restricting it to 10 moves, because I would get that. My snake would go, can I go left? And it would be a wall and it'd be no. And it's like, well, how about left? And then it was like, but left? And it would ask left like 10 times, and then it would time out. And then of course it would do this terrible move. So that's a really important optimization. In a random move chaos, I might in fact want to avoid food just so I don't get too big, because that was something I found pretty problematic. In a chaotic thing, it's really easy to get tangled in yourself. For defensive snakes, the most famous defensive snake is chicken snake. I love chicken snake. Chicken snake came up at a Victoria event in the very early Battlesnake days, and I'm going to show you what chicken snake does. So you may not know this, but you can create a game with any public snake that exists. So let's do one with basic strats and chicken. So the original chicken snake is by Rubbles, who is a friend of mine. And the poor guy, we were supposed to do a Battlesnake event together as a group. We all worked together. And we were like, yeah, let's do it. Battlesnakes in a month. Let's do a team. And like 4 or 5 of us were going to do it. And we all ditched Rob on the Friday before Battlesnake. We're like, yeah, I can't make it. So he was at Battlesnake by himself. And the result was this snake. Oh, geez. Okay. Chicken snake moved down to bands. It's probably waking up. It might be, I think it's on a Heroku server, so it might need a second to get going. Here we go. Awesome. So chicken snake does this. It sits in a corner and it rotates in on itself. And when you have a chaos-based snake like mine, you can usually wait till your chaos snake just dies on its own. So chicken snake, that like rotating tail chasing strategy, classic. Everyone should know how to do that. It should be in your repertoire. So build a chicken snake when you've got a time. It is such a good thing. And the code, I believe, is visible on GitHub as well. So that tail rotation, figure out how to do that. Figure out how to get that. It's a very safe maneuver. And the first time chicken snake appeared in a Battlesnake competition, it came second because no one was anticipating that. No one had seen that strategy before. So very important tool in your Battlesnake repertoire. So these are the rules. Chicken snake avoids food so it doesn't get too big, and it spins in on itself. And then there's some threshold, I think it's around 20, where it will pop out to get food and then go right back to following its own tail in the corner and trying not to be noticed. So it's a good strategy. So here's a screenshot. And this happened a lot. You can sort of see my purple basic strat snake. 9 times out of 10, my own snake would just terminate because it got too big and terminated. And the only time I could get a win condition with chicken snake was on those few occasions when it popped out to get food. For aggressive strategies, so now going beyond here, there are a couple of common themes. A ramming snake is great, so seeking head-to-head collisions with snakes that are smaller than you. So keep an eye on everyone's health, keep an eye on everyone's length. and find those snakes. So think about how to pull that data out and manipulate it and build new functions to do that. There's also Hungry Snake, which I like. You can get huge, steal all the food, trap other snakes in smaller spaces, so they hit into a wall or they starve. That's something that pops up a lot too. So even just focusing on these strategies, writing functions that deliberately do these things is going to be very interesting. So give that a go. And, figure out what you want to do. What do you want to play with? Should you eat to get really, really big? Do you want to behave differently depending on how big the board is or how many snakes are on the board? You might want to have some conditions at the start of the game that decide which strategy you're going to take depending on different things. And of course, combo these up. Maybe you'll write a snake that starts its game in kind of defensive mode, and then once it gets to a certain size, it can start going aggressive. Or maybe you go chaotic. You have a very deliberate like chicken snake strategy, and then once you reach a certain size, you go chaos. With these basic strategies, you can start mixing and matching like crazy. And like, what about machine learning? A lot of people get into Battlesnake and are interested in the possibilities that machine learning presents. And that's when we start thinking about like possible future board states, trying to predict what other snakes are doing, choosing your move based on likelihood of what may or may not happen, not just with your own snake, but with every snake on the game board. Then take a look at machine learning. And I would direct you to go to the Battlesnake Twitch channel. There are some archived videos from people talking about machine learning from the Stay Home and Code event that happened earlier this summer. The other thing that's happened in Battlesnake is there are some new game modes. So everything we've talked about is your start positions. Everything is really good for that standard game. But there is completely uncharted territory. These strategies are brand spanking new with these game modes. So there's a new Royale mode you can see here in the gray. It's like any of the new Royale games. So there's kind of like a fog of war coming in. And if your snake is inside this fog, its health starts to plummet. So you can live there for a little while, but not indefinitely. And of course, you can take a standard Battlesnake snake and plop it into these boards and see how it does. But there are whole new opportunities for new strategies. Taking a look at this Royale game mode, and this is really uncharted territory. Like if you're looking to dominate, I know with standard Battlesnake, there's some juggernaut snakes out there that are kind of always at the top, and it might feel like you can never get past that. There is a whole world to explore in Royale games because people aren't ready for it yet. The old snakes don't necessarily perform best here anymore. So take a look. As well as Squads. Squads is another new game mode where there are two snakes on the board. So here's two purple snakes, so Brad's rookie snake and untimely neglected wearable, and the two pink ones are my basic strats. And what's noticeable about that is if your two snakes are on the team, you can overlap. So if your heads collide, you will destroy each other, but you can overlap your bodies. And I just saw the Summer Code event for Battlesnake, and we saw our first new strategies with this game mode where someone was making it so their snakes were overlapping, so they're like shadowed on top of each other. And that just cleaned the whole board. So now the next step is, how do we defeat that? How can we think about how to progress? So another new zone of uncharted territory in Battlesnake games where the strategies haven't been figured out yet. There's a lot to explore here. So I hope that got you excited. There's so much to build. I've given you the basics of, avoid walls, avoid running into yourself, avoid running into other snakes, and then how to start thinking about, okay, well, what do I do with food now? What are my strategies? So enter in a Battlesnake event. Get started. There's no excuse not to. The event that's running right now, just started, I think, a couple days ago, is Battlesnake at YO Hackathon. So that's running September 25th to October 19th. It is not too late to sign up. You can do this. And there are cash prizes for this event. And there's entry-level leagues and veteran leagues as well. I also have some very exciting news, some preview information. Battlesnake Victoria is going to be back. It will be virtually run February 2021. So Battlesnake started in Victoria. We've historically run it as a live event in Victoria. Unfortunately, with COVID, that what was planned got kind of hastily scrapped, but it is coming. So keep your eyes open. The Victoria event is close to everyone's hearts. It will be big. There will be a lot of fun stuff. And it is never too early to start preparing. So please take a look. That is something to look forward to, something I'm looking forward to. I'll be there. So that kind of covers it. Please check out more information at play.battlesnake.com. You can register your snake. You can register for the events online. So just popping back to the website here, you can register for the Wyoming Hack event, as well as run challenges and arenas and create games in the new game modes to start playing around and testing and building. But also check out the community. If you found this helpful, there's even more help in the Slack channel for Battlesnake. And of course, there's an event running on Discord. So when we have a large event going, you'll see the Snake Pit live and the live tournament, which is what we'll be doing for Victoria as well. Cool. All right, that was a whirlwind tour. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? All makes perfect sense. Pour through my Git commits later on the public repo. Fantastic. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for coming to Startup Slam and for hanging out with me.
Yeah, thanks, Aurora, and thank you all for coming. We still got 3 minutes to take any questions. In the meantime, I would just like to remind everyone that we can the Talk to an Expert roundtables. And you can sign up to the registration desk on Hopin.
Hooray. And definitely reach out if you are building your first, if you're building your first Battlesnake, like feel free to shamelessly start from mine if you so desire. My partner built a snake in the last summer event, Untimely Neglected Wearable, and he started from my snake. So I was very proud about that. It's a chaos-based snake, and he just kept building more and more rules. So definitely like go to town. This GitHub repo is public. It's just barely the start. And there's so many more things to solve and push in there. So don't be shy. Cool. Awesome sauce. Thank you all. Okay, I'll leave this up here if you want the URLs to check things out.